Welcome back, everyone, to our weekly immigration news recap. I'm here with Jath Shao, immigration attorney and keen observer of all things immigration trends and news. And I'll let Jath introduce himself in just a minute. But quickly here, it is Thursday, May 29th. It's about 10:12 a.m. Eastern time. And I say that because we'll release this podcast tomorrow. We'll be covering a number of news stories, but if you're a follower of immigration news, you know that a lot might change between now and then. So just want to caveat that fact. But Jath, today we're going to cover two sort of core stories, and there's a lot of sub stories underneath that. One around the wave of policies targeting foreign students from a variety of government agencies, and two, sort of the escalating arrests and new tactics by ICE at immigration court, which I know you're keenly aware of. But before we get into both of that, do you just want to give everyone a little bit of information about yourself, your practice, your background, and what types of clients you work with?
Hi, I'm Jath Shao. I'm an immigration attorney in Cleveland, Ohio. Um, I'm kind of I call a double immigrant. So my family originally came from China. They went to the Philippines, and then from Philippines to America. So I speak Filipino and Chinese. And I came here as an F1 student myself. A lot of this is near and dear to my heart. These international students and what they're going through. So I kind of fell into it because sometimes I guess like Jay-Z said, it's the life that chooses you. So this is the life that chose me to help people who were like the younger me.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that you were an F1 student yourself before. And obviously, I think the way I found you on LinkedIn, and I recommend people go and follow you on LinkedIn because you're always sort of posting commentary about things that you're hearing from other immigration attorneys, things that you're doing with your clients in particular. And so I started following your stuff because you were somebody who I was using to get information from. So I'm excited to have you here today. Thanks for joining, and we can chop it up about the news a little bit. So I'll just recap what's been going on with the policies around F1 students in the last week. So the last time we recorded this particular podcast, it was last Thursday. We predicted another story was going to happen, and sure enough, later that day it did, when DHS sent a letter to Harvard letting them know that they would not be able to enroll any foreign students going forward. Like a lot of other immigration attorneys predicted, that was blocked by a judge pretty shortly thereafter. And now there's a legal fight that's going to happen between Harvard and the administration on whether or not Harvard is able to admit foreign students. It's obviously much broader than just Harvard at this point. Couple days later, right in after the long holiday weekend, on Tuesday, Nahal Tusi from Politico got access to a leaked State Department memo to consulates overseas, where Secretary of State Marco Rubio let consulates and embassies know that they needed to halt new F, M, and J visa interviews. So F students, sort of one of the primary groups affected there, but also J1s. That's a number of different folks within the J1 program that are going to be impacted by that. And then yesterday, on Wednesday, Marco Rubio comes out and I'll share the statement here because it was rather brief, and I'll just share my screen to show it. It was rather brief but very declarative. Marco Rubio came out and said that the State Department would now be putting new policies in place to potentially revoke visas for Chinese students. Obviously, the statement's very short. It's vague. We don't know how it's going to be implemented. But in just 1 week, just those three news updates alone for foreign students, Jath, what's your reaction, and sort of what are you hearing from the clients you work with and other attorneys that you interact with?
I guess it's all hearing a lot of fear from a lot of people because, I mean, quite honestly, I mean, America's like been the number one nation for education for years. Actually, so before me, my father and my grandfather were both F1 students in their own times, and it just seems like. I mean, I don't know why they chose Harvard particularly. There's been rumors whether Trump's son applied there and got denied, but coming after Harvard is a big move. Revoking the ability to enroll new students, and even their current students would be forced to transfer or change to another status if the executive order went through. And if you look at the letter that they sent to Harvard, they're asking for all sorts of information about people that participated in protests, people's coursework, and just very, very minute details that to me, it seems like the government shouldn't be running private education, but seems like they want to, especially in terms of like a viewpoint that they want to push.
Yeah.
Um,
What do you think will happen ultimately with that case? I mean, you're a lawyer, you understand the court system a lot better than I do. What's sort of the timeline and the trajectory of that case? And in the meantime, is there an opportunity? Is there an opening for the Trump administration to do something similar to other universities?
I mean, I would think it's only a matter of time before they try to go after another other universities. There was a list. I mean, there were a couple of different lists, but there were lists of students they were university they were targeting for quote unquote anti-Semitic views, which seems a little bit subjective. You know, like what someone calls anti-Semitic. You know, we've seen people detained for writing op-eds or for being presidents of the Palestinian Student Union, things like that, where in the past, maybe that would be considered legitimate protest, and probably under a more normal administration, it would be. But it seems like this administration is really trying to push the laws to the limit and perhaps beyond. And in terms of what's going to happen, I think there's two different tracks I would look at. So obviously, there's the legal track where Harvard, they have their high-powered lawyers, they got their injunction right away. If this thing does really go up to the Supreme Court, I would expect maybe Alito and Thomas to side with Trump, and then everybody else to say that this is unconstitutional. You can't limit people's freedom of speech. But on the practical side, people are scared. Like people.
Right.
I mean, if I was a parent trying to send my kid to a school in another country, I would be scared to send them to somewhere where they might be detained or deported for protesting or for things that seem very normal college student behavior.
Yeah, and I think that what's concerning about it is in a vacuum, the Harvard, story alone, it seems like, oh, this just feels like it's a political theater, right? Obviously, it has real world implications. It's going to impact real people and it's going to impact the university. But, the motive of it, if Christy Nome went on Fox News that day and she didn't talk at all about, the threat that F1 students pose or the fact that, international students are a problem for the US. It was nothing like that. It was all language around Harvard allows anti-Semitism on campus, and this is a punishment that we're, giving them as a result of that. But then on Tuesday, right, and this comes after, ICE for several months was revoking SEVIS records for foreign students, for F1 students. A lot of those got reinstated for the time being, at least. But then ICE, is now targeting F1 OPT records as well and really cracking down on that. And then on Tuesday, the memo gets leaked or the communication gets leaked from Marco Rubio that they're halting all new appointments for F1 students. So you were an F1 student at the time, and I talked to some former consular officers, and my understanding is a lot of new freshmen who are who are planning to go to college in fall of this year, fall of 2025, would be going for their visa appointment now or in the next month or so in order to get their visa to come to the States for the fall semester. What was your experience like, I guess, from a personal standpoint, and then just hear more of your take on that story?
So I guess from a personal standpoint, I have to admit that I went to an international school, so some of the parents in my school actually worked for the U.S. Embassy. So we were lucky enough that the school was able to take all of our passports and get them processed together, like the guidance counselor. But I mean, as somebody who later on went back and came back for law school, I'm applying by myself. Usually, a few months before, you would gather your documents, your I-20 from your school, your proof of finances, and go to the embassy, try to get into your interview for your student visa. And I would say it does have a very big impact because right now, okay, if I'm an international student, international school student from a high end school in Asia, do I want to go to America or would I rather go to Canada or Australia or England or somewhere else where it might not be as risky? I think it's definitely going to be a big impact on American higher education. The money and the different perspective that international students bring in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it again, just the broadness of the policy. We'll see because nothing's been publicly stated yet about that leaked telegram, but I guess we'll see how long, in theory, the stopping of new visa appointments for those groups goes into effect. Because if it's a couple days, and then they reverse it, maybe it's not too disruptive. But if it's a month, if it's 2 months, if it's longer.
Yeah, I mean, because school is about to start in August, right? So you would think people would want to have their ducks in a row and be able to rent a place to stay or make practical plans too.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
It's also concerning too. I think you mentioned that they I don't know if you mentioned it, but they're targeting Chinese students too, especially
Yeah,
particularly. Which it seems like going back to that whole CVIS thing from a couple of months ago. So if you're domestically in America, courts have ruled that the Constitution applies, within America to all persons within the U.S. But kind of a gray area if you're somebody applying at an embassy overseas, and they have a lot more power to just say no and not even have to give you the information against you, right? Because it's national security. You're not in America. You're not protected by the Constitution. So I feel like a lot of this stuff, whether it's the Trump administration's anti-immigration plans, they're using the State Department because no, it's harder to question them. You don't have as much of a right to sue the State Department as you would to sue USCIS.
yeah,
And maybe there's a little less sympathy because, you know, let's say like, somebody who's been in your community 4 years as a student, you know them versus like somebody who's coming outside that nobody from America knows. Like, it's a little less sympathetic of a cohort to defend. Um,
it is, but I think what you hit on there is important, which is like the criteria is so vague, right? The criteria for assessing a foreign student or anyone for a visa overseas is, as like you mentioned, as opposed to in the U.S., is far more vague and far more at the discretion of the consular officer.
there's no way to appeal. There's no way to
Yeah.
sue. You can only apply again. And every time you apply, if it goes denied, 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 that's just going to make the chances worse and worse.
Exactly. And so now that the motivation supposedly of these actions is that the State Department's going to roll out increased social media vetting, which is something that USCIS has also talked about rolling out as well for visa applications. And again, what that looks like what is considered what is considered inappropriate anti-American social media activity, that's open for interpretation. And two, how the consular officers are supposed to actually do this in practice is interesting. I've been trying to talk with former consular officers about it. I actually, back in college, interned at the Consular Training Division at the Foreign Service Institute. And part of that internship was I would role play for consular officers in training as a foreign national, trying to get a visa. And what shocked me is like your interview, whole entire interview is 2 or 3 minutes, and you bring your whole stack of papers, and there seems to be no rhyme or reason sometimes of what they're looking at. And how are you going to fit into that, 5-minute interview process, social media vetting as well, I think is a big, big open question.
Yeah, I think I guess that's one thing I have. I guess versus like somebody who was born here. Like I've been in that line, and I've seen like in Manila for the longest time they would say that like because your number comes up and you go to window 1, 2, or 3, and if you got the tall guy from Texas with a beard, you're probably going to get approved. If you got the short, the spiky haired blonde lady, you're probably going to get denied. And like individual officer, there is a personal bias there where there are officers that are stricter or less than others, but it feels like a whole thing entirely when it's the government. Because like you said, like what does social media vetting even mean? Do they only look at publicly available stuff? Are they able to break in if you have a private profile? And
Yeah.
who's programming the algorithm? What are the things that it considers derogatory? And they don't have to tell us, right? Because it's national security,
Yeah.
consular non-reviewability. It is a little scary. It feels like we're watching a bad science fiction movie, to be honest.
Yeah, and well, that might be a good segue to our next topic, which is there's no remediation opportunity, like you said, like there is in the U.S. with immigration court. And the final thing I'll mention on that topic, the F1 student topic, is Nahal Tuzi, the reporter at Politico who broke the story on the leaked telegram. She in an updated version quoted some folks, some former foreign service officers, and folks in the know, basically saying like, look, since this administration has come in, communication's been very vague and confusing. We don't know at the consulate and embassy level how we are supposed to actually implement these policies in practice. And I think that's something that we've seen at USCIS as well.
I've been told that by officers. He's like, I would help you, but like, 5 levels above me in DC, they told me this and that, and it changes every week. And I guess one other thing I'd like to point out too is like,
Yeah.
it's FMNJ. So like, I've heard from a lot of M1. So M1 is more of a trade school, but there's a lot of pilots, and right now pilot shortage is a very important thing. So there's a lot of pilot trainees that would fall in that M. And for J, it covers a whole bunch of categories like au pairs, seasonal workers for resorts, even a lot of STEM and special education teachers fall under J1. So it's a lot of different. It's not just students, right? It's a lot of different categories that are being shut out, and we don't know what social media vetting like. Do they what? I guess we don't know what they're vetting for, right? Like, who exactly are they denying or approving? And so yeah.
No, I'm glad you flagged that because someone I posted about this on LinkedIn when it came out, and somebody an attorney who works with Jay's called me out on that and was like, yeah, like look, students are one cohort, but J1s like you mentioned, they serve a variety of different roles, and personally, I grew up on the coast of Maine, and every single restaurant and B&B and brewery on the coast of Maine wouldn't be able to function in the summer if it weren't for J1
I
workers.
just spoke to a group of 89, 89 Filipino STEM teachers, and that's just one city in Ohio.
Yep. So the ramifications of it, I mean, unfortunately, yet to be seen, and in the next few weeks, hopefully there's positive updates, but one way or another, we're going to see, and I imagine this story is going to continue developing fairly quickly. Um, okay, so the other major thing that's been happening in the last 7 days, starting last Friday, are these escalating arrests, specifically at immigration court. So there was a wave of news stories from local media of ICE, in normal street clothes, showing up to immigration court in San Francisco, Boston, the Boston suburbs, Miami, and I think a few other cities as well, and arresting folks. In addition to that, there were a couple of, moments where a couple of instances that got widely distributed in the press where ICE seemingly either screwed up or in one instance or overreacted in another. There was the Mississippi father who was detained at their naturalization interview that got a lot of press for basically like a minor issue on on a form he completed in like 2015. And then there was the U.S. citizen who was detained in the ICE workplace raid when they accused him of his real ID not being real. That whole thing was caught on camera, and we can put the link in the podcast description so people can read that story and watch that because that was quite shocking. So, Jath, you are an immigration attorney who represents clients at court. So, what's sort of your reaction, and how are you approaching immigration court now?
It is a little scary. So I actually had some friends in San Diego that it happened to their client. So there is what's called expedited removal. So it used to be if you were caught within 100 miles of the border within 2 weeks of arrival, then they could do expedited removal, which means that they can deport you without having to go through the court. And I believe Trump changed it to if you've been in the U.S. for less than 2 years and you're encountered anywhere in the country. So what they're doing is if someone who's been here less than 2 years, and especially if they don't have a lawyer, then they're trying to snatch them up from court. It's a little scary because if you don't show up to court, you could get a removal order in absentia. If you do show up to court, you could get detained by ICE, and it's just really scary. I guess so. There is a 4 million case backlog, but shortcutting the system and cutting out due process is not the right way to go about it.
Do you have any understanding of how ICE is choosing the specific courts that they're targeting? It sounds like you said they're trying to target. Go ahead.
As I understand, if somebody's been here less than 2 years,
Okay.
so that's why I tell people if you've been here in the country more than 2 years, make sure you have proof of that you've been here more than 2 years. And another big thing is like whether or not you have a lawyer, right? So if you have a lawyer, what we've been doing with people is we've been doing hearings by WebEx, which is the government's kind of their version
Yep.
of a Zoom hearing. So that would be one way to be safe versus like having to go in court in person. But it is a little scary. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. It's to be able to take someone and take them out without going through the court system.
How is ICE able to determine what types of folks don't have immigration attorneys representing them when they show up to court, or are they just sort of parking themselves out there and like grabbing people that they spot?
I would say both. So
Yeah.
in some cases, right? So typically on the charging document, it'll say, you entered the U.S., on or about, May 25, 2023, and if that's less than 2 years, then that's less than. If it's more than 2 years, then that would be one way. But they're also hanging up. So one of my friend actually in San Diego, they were trying to take her client, and she asked them for a warrant, and they
Mm.
didn't have an actual warrant for the actual person. So she was able to walk the person out. But it is scary. Some of them they're just trying to get them at random, and some of them they're tricking them. So there was a Venezuelan student, I believe, in New York City, who they told him they're going to close his case, which to the defendant that seems like, oh, okay, cool, you're going to close my case, but he didn't realize when they closed his case that meant they're going to close his asylum claim, and then they grabbed him. I believe he was the first New York City student to be detained. It was
How do
just
you
days ago. Yeah.
how do you try to keep up with these tactics? Because it's been a roller coaster following and since the Trump administration came in from day one. ICE seems to be constantly trying these new tactics almost every single week. Like, how do you, as an immigration attorney, keep up with all of this?
I guess I have my communities on LinkedIn that I talk to, and talk to other immigration attorneys. But I, that's one thing about immigration. I guess technically we're competitors, but in a way it feels like we're all on the same side right now. I joke about it with friends, but I feel like I'm a Jedi fighting against the Empire right now.
What's been your reaction to some of the, I mean, bigger, more public, again, either
Yeah.
massive mistakes by ICE, like detaining a U.S. citizen, right, in a raid, or some of these like seemingly over aggressive actions, like going after folks for minor form issues from
I
10
mean,
years ago.
so if you're talking about that, the guy in Mississippi, it's hard, right? So like as an attorney, I want to feel
Yeah.
sympathy for him. As a human being, like when I look on his Facebook and see that it's all "Let's go, Brandon," and he was very much a Trump supporter, and so was his
Oh, I
wife.
didn't know that.
I believe
Interesting.
it's hard. So that guy, I believe he came on a J1 for like a year in high school, exchange student in high school. Met this girl, went back, came back, married her, and in 2015 they didn't file what's called the removal of conditions, so the I-751, and I guess when he went for his interview in 2025, they were like, "Well, you didn't file this 10 years ago," and then they grabbed him. From what I understand, they had a bond hearing on May 27. He was denied bond, but they did reopen his case. So right now, he is able to fight the case. I-751 would basically be proving that he is still married to the same spouse. I believe her name is Savannah, and
Mhm.
it seems like he should have a good chance to win. But it's interesting, I mean, he was in support of all this until he got caught up himself. So I
Yeah.
don't know if that's changed his mind at all. But people, I think people don't always understand the implications of what they vote for, or
Yeah.
what they support. In terms of the other guy, Leonardo Garcia Venegas, yeah, he had a real ID. He was born in Florida, and instead of apologizing for not believing his real ID was true, they actually ended up trying to charge him with interfering with the arrest of everybody else. I believe
Yeah.
he was trying to video or something, but it is scary, right? So like, he did have a real ID. He was born here, but somehow they didn't verify it right away, and they didn't believe him, which we can kind of speculate as to why. And
Yeah.
there was that other case. I believe it was in Georgia. I think the lady that got pulled over in her truck, that it wasn't even the right truck, right? They dropped the charges against her. That one, forget her name, but she was detained for like illegal U-turn. It turned out it was the wrong truck.
Yeah.
So that lady was able to bond out. But I mean, it is scary, right? So the very minor things, right? Like who would think you would get deported for making an illegal U-turn, or for somebody else in a similar car making an illegal U-turn?
Yeah, and it seems like the commands from the top down are sort of like arrest first, apologize later.
I
Like,
mean, I'll give you an example. So I have a case myself. He's I think we talked about a couple weeks ago, but he's the father of a Marine and the father of a Navy corpsman. So he has two sons in the military, and we had everything ready. We show up at his interview, and they're like, "Boom! Oh, sorry, like this document from 2012, like we're gonna deny it because and it's like and I'm like, are you serious? This guy is like a military father. We're right here. We have everything ready, and they're like, no, like his I-130. He had an I-130 from his wife, I believe, from 2008 or nine, something like that. And they're like, oh, it's been too long. Like you didn't keep updating us, so now we're gonna kill that I-130. And I'm like, well, I actually have his wife right here. Like, can we just fill out the paperwork right here and pay by? And they were like, no. That officer was like, well, I tried, like but all the way up in Washington, 5 levels above me, they said no.
yeah,
And you would
Yeah.
think the Secretary of State, Secretary of Home Secretary, why are they getting involved with like one random case in Cleveland? And also like, why are they getting involved in a case in Cleveland to tell a military father that, oh, we're not going to give you your green card today, and we're going to put you back at risk of deportation again, after you've been fighting this case for like 15, 20 years. It's kind of not efficient and frankly pretty cruel, I think. I think
Yeah, for sure. Last question on this story for you, and then I'll let you give any final thoughts that you have. But uh, sort of publicly in the media, right? Most of the stories you're hearing is that judges, you know, that the actions of the Trump administration and its various agencies are being mostly pushed back on by judges, right? Judges are tending to side with immigration attorneys in a lot of these cases for, I would say, good reason. What's been your experience with immigration
I
judges?
think so it's interesting, right? Like I've had a lot of experience with immigration judges, and I would say some of them are classic. They used to be prosecutors, and then they become a judge, and then as a judge, they act like a second prosecutor. But they do sometimes surprise you. I've seen people that like one guy spent 20 years in the public interest field, like doing pro bono stuff. He flips, he becomes the most strict immigration judge. And I've seen a
Uh,
former immigration attorney former immigration attorney colleague flip and become a really strict prosecutor.
uh,
But then again, you do see people that were ICE prosecutors become like reasonable judges and kind of, at least if you follow the rules and you try, they stay within the system. But at the end of the day, the immigration court, they're not real judges. They're employees of the Department of Justice, and
right.
they kind of have to follow orders. It's just a little scary now. Sometimes, I feel like I'm going a 2-on-1 when the judge is prosecuting too. Um, but in terms of overall, like a more bird's eye view of the Trump administration, I would say that the difference in Trump administration part two, they're not waiting for permission. Like they're
Right.
gonna try it and then, okay, I dare you to go to court and sue and make a judge stop me. Versus like maybe a Biden or even a Trump one to be like, let's see if this will work first. Let's make sure this policy is vetted before we put it out. Right now, it seems that they're just shooting from the hip. There's no adults in the room telling them, wait, we should hold off on this. I mean, this whole anti-China stuff, like these things are like, I mean, I don't know if these things would have made it under a normal administration or even Trump won. Some of this stuff is kind of out there.
It's converting. I mean, Rubio's been, tooting this horn for years to be fair, but it's turning what people would normally consider like political sound bites, right, on the Chinese Communist Party into like policy at a mass scale, which again, there's many issues with, but one of which is whether like how that actually is implemented in practice.
Right. Or some of these people, like there's green card holders detained for like, they committed theft 20 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
I don't, and to be fair, I mean, these laws are in the books, but I think we were joking about it earlier. Like, Stephen Miller and his people must be like reading through these law books, like trying to find these obscure regulations from 100 years ago to use against people now.
Yeah, it's far faster than the first Trump administration. But the last thing I want to share before I hand it off to you to sort of share a trend or a story that you think is being undercovered is a clip from Joseph Edlow's confirmation hearing last week, because I think it's a good through line for what we've been talking about.
While the whole Department of Homeland Security is working hard to make America safe again, USCIS must play as critical a role in that mission as any other immigration enforcement agency. At its core, USCIS must be an immigration enforcement agency, an agency that is dedicated to ever-evolving and innovative techniques for screening and vetting its applicant pool. An agency that must be vigorous in its efforts to detect, deter, and disrupt immigration fraud, threats to our national security, and to the safety of the American public, and to ensure that only those aliens deserving of the honor to become citizens of this great nation are able to exercise the sacred right to vote. These core missions will make America safe, while also aiding us in more rapidly and more confidently adjudicating cases, will lead to a significant reduction of the agency's backlog, and will put American interests first.
So, I wanted to share. Last time I walked into USCIS, I was there for someone for a citizen interview, and I'm seeing these posters on the wall, and they're all like, if you're here illegally, leave and come back the right way, which that may or may not actually be possible, or marriage fraud is a crime, and so I guess it seems like USCIS, which traditionally has been a benefits agency, granting green cards, granting people status, granting citizenship, and if they're flipping to be part of the enforcement, part of the USCIS is flipping to be part of the enforcement arm of immigration, it's a little bit scary because anytime you apply to them, you give them so much information about yourself, your academic background, your educational background, your work background, your history, and they have a lot of information they could use against you if they wanted to, and it seems like they will.
And they're requesting more, right? That was sort of what we saw in the last Trump administration with the public charge rule, is just requesting more and more information, personal information about the beneficiaries and their families. And I'd expect us to see a return to that. More pages added to forms across the board, I think
And like
is.
and also they've been really strict, like like if you check the box or like just very minor, very small things that under typically no other administrations they would let you correct it at the interview, but now they're like, oh, you didn't check this box, denied. Or
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we have a couple more minutes here, and what I want to do is give you the floor to talk about a trend or a story that you think is undercovered or maybe not as widely known by immigration attorneys, by your colleagues in the field that maybe you think they should know more about.
I guess one of the things that I've been monitoring, and especially as somebody who's married to a U.S. citizen, is how long it takes for just a regular immediate relative petition for a spouse, a parent, or a child of U.S. citizen. I just got approval for one, and it took 2 years just for the I-130. So if you can imagine, like, you're an American citizen, you want to bring your wife or your mom or your kid here, like now it's like 2.5 years. That doesn't seem like it's fair. So I would say that one thing I always try to tell people is like, I get it, like it's easy to demonize immigrants, especially if you're from middle America and you never seen one. But I would like people to frame immigration a little bit more as like, what about the rest of American citizens? Like behind every family-based petition, there's a U.S. citizen or a green card sponsor. Behind every work petition, there's an American company that needs this worker, whether it's a high-end job or a low-end job. They couldn't find an American to fill it. And I think sometimes like framing the discussion in a way, maybe that'll get more people to be more sympathetic to the people going through this.
No, it's a great point. I think there's a real communication gap right now on the pro-immigration side of things. I think for the last couple of years in the national debate, the anti-immigrant crowd has been obviously far more successful, but it's because they're focused on very specific, real world issues that, let's face it, a huge swath of Americans do experience. But on the flip side, there's I would argue 5, 10 times as many instances or stories where immigrants are benefiting, like you said, American businesses, are coming to marry an American, are the child of an American citizen.
Or like, yeah, you're the child. Like, let's say I want to move back. Like, am I going to be able to enroll my kid in school by August, or is it going to,
Yeah.
or are we talking about August 2 years from now? If I'm going to try to bring my wife here, is she going to be able to make it here before my parents die? Like, I mean, these are people like these are real people being affected by these policy decisions by people in Washington. And I just, that's why I appreciate Lawfully for helping track this information, because being able for clients, they always ask, how long is it going to take? How long is it going to take? How long is it going to take? And honestly, sometimes I don't know, but so I appreciate you guys gathering data and helping us track this, so I can tell a client, okay, if you apply in Chicago, it'll be this long. If you apply in Minnesota or LA, it'll take this long. Tracking this data and making sure that people can kind of help plan their lives, it has a good effect on people's lives.
That's our goal, and I think now is a more important time than ever to be able to have that data. I'm personally, as I've been consuming the reports that USCIS, Department of Labor, DHS releases on, and a lot of these reports are mandated, by the way, by Congress, that they have to be released quarterly or they have to be released monthly. And we're starting to see some signs, some signals, and some actual instances where data is not being released on time by the government. And that makes it incredibly difficult for immigration attorneys, in our view, to help their clients and provide them with accurate information. So that's a big part of what we're trying to do and put the puzzle pieces together. Jath, anything else? Where can folks find you if they want to follow you? I know you're on LinkedIn. Are you on X or Blue Sky?
So I'm on TikTok, Attorney Jath, and LinkedIn. Those are my two main platforms. I also am also on Instagram, or you can visit ShaoLawFirm.com and book a call or consultation. I recently introduced that because some people just have a quick question, and it's not a full consultation, but at the same time, like I can't talk to people for free ethically as an attorney because I would know too much about their case, and
Yeah.
and typically a lot of these quick questions aren't really quick questions. So.
I saw another attorney post about that on LinkedIn. Like, hey, clients, like, give your immigration attorneys a little bit of grace right now. Like, if you call and you have a quick question, like, we'll do our best, but we know that there's no such thing as a quick question when you're talking to an immigration attorney in this day
I
and
would say
age.
now more than ever, it's probably better to at least if you're worried, at least ask first because it's easier to fix before than after it's been screwed up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jath, I really appreciate you joining us. We'll see what other news comes out in the next couple of weeks, but I know you'll be closely following it, and we'll have to have you back on soon to chop it up and talk through all this stuff.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jath.